On the 10th of September 2017, the frozen corpse of a 19-year-old girl named Kanika Jenkins was discovered lying face down inside a walk-in freezer at the Crown Plaza Chicago O'Hare Hotel. The victim had gone to a party that was held at the hotel the night before, and it was the last time she'd been seen alive. The peculiar circumstances surrounding the teenager's death sparked much controversy, with several conspiracy theories emerging from the public. As the investigation began, many of the victim's friends and family started questioning the authorities due to their negligence and how they mishandled the tragic case. Over the course of the investigation, detectives struggled to piece the case together as they tried their best to figure out what really happened to Kanika Jenkins on that fateful Saturday night, when she unfortunately lost her life. The tragic case of Kanika Jenkins is a vivid representation of the recklessness that can occur when one melds true crime, social media, and misinformation all together. This chaotic mixture often creates a situation where what is and what isn't becomes blurred, causing even more confusion and leaving the truth behind the case shrouded in mystery. Kanika Jenkins was born on the 27th of May 1998, and she lived with her family on the west side of Chicago, Illinois. Records show that Kanika had a great relationship with her mother, Teresa Martin, and she even acted as her mother's primary caregiver when Teresa underwent surgery for breast cancer earlier that year. Kanika was known to be a good and caring young woman by all of those who loved her, but at just 19 years old, she was still a youthful teenager. Like many girls her age, Kanika wanted to enjoy her teenage years. So on the 8th of September 2017, and left the house at exactly 11:30 p.m. that Friday, after telling Teresa she was going bowling with some friends. However, instead of driving to the bowling alley, Kanika went to attend a private party at the Crown Plaza Chicago O'Hare Hotel, located in the neighboring Rosemont. And she got to the hotel at exactly 1:13 a.m. that Saturday night. The party took place in room 926 of the hotel, and several records show that most of the people who attended the hotel party were Kanika's friends. Numerous eyewitnesses who were also at the party told detectives they'd noticed Kanika drinking cognac brandy throughout the night. One of Kanika's close friends and associates also told detectives that she seemed tipsy, as she looked like she was swaying back and forth when she hugged him. There was one unidentified witness who informed the detectives that Kanika wasn't acting like her usual self that night. The eyewitness then described how Kanika would stand up, dance around for a short time before suddenly looking sad and sitting back in her chair. Investigative records also show Kanika's older sister, Leonore Harris, had called at exactly 1:30 a.m. and spoken with her on the phone that night, but the details of their discussion were redacted. Around 3:30 a.m. that Saturday, Kanika and her friends decided to leave the party, but as they walked down the hotel's lobby, Kanika suddenly realized she'd left her car keys and cell phone back in the hotel room. Her friends then told Kanika that they'd go and get her missing items, as they knew she was too drunk to find them herself. So they told Kanika to wait for them downstairs before leaving her alone for about 10 to 15 minutes as they went to look for her cell phone and keys in the hotel room. However, after her friends had retrieved the missing items and returned to where they had left Kanika, she was gone. They all searched the hotel trying to find her, but it really seemed like she'd vanished into thin air. Back at home, Kanika's mother, Teresa, was already getting worried that she couldn't reach her daughter. Around 4 a.m., Kanika's friends finally decided to call her mother and to tell her that her daughter had disappeared. Teresa arrived at the Crown Plaza Hotel at around 5:30 a.m. that Saturday morning. After getting in contact with the hotel management, she was informed that the hotel could not give her access to the security camera footage from the day before until Kanika was officially reported missing to the police. With her daughter still missing and no other options, Teresa called 911 around 7 a.m. and told the emergency dispatcher that her daughter was missing. Following protocol, the dispatcher told Teresa that it would be wise to wait a couple more hours before declaring her daughter missing, as in cases like this, the missing person usually appears after some time. However, Teresa didn't want to wait, as she knew every second she wasted was precious. She kept looking all over the hotel trying to find her daughter, but even with all her efforts, she couldn't uncover Kanika's whereabouts. Several hours had passed, and Kanika was still missing. So at 12:45 p.m., Kanika's older sister, Leonore, filed a missing persons report with the Rosemont Police Department. The authorities then informed the hotel that Kanika had gone missing at 1:15 p.m., and it was at that point that the investigation finally began. The officers thoroughly searched the 9th floor where Kanika was last seen before looking through public areas, but there was no traces of Kanika or where she could be. Kanika's family then joined the search around 6 p.m., knocking on hotel room doors and asking the guests if they'd seen Kanika. A few residents alerted the hotel about the family's search. A hotel employee then called the police to complain about the disturbance, and one particular officer who was already on the scene listened to the family's pleas, as they said they couldn't just sit back while Kanika was missing. Teresa then urged the officer to review the security footage again to see if there was anything they might have missed that could lead them to Kanika. At the request of Kanika's family, investigators reviewed the security footage again, and after going over each recording carefully, one detective finally noticed Kanika walking unsteadily at exactly 3:20 a.m. near the hotel's front desk. Kanika, who was visibly intoxicated in the security footage, was then seen again at 3:25 a.m., exiting an elevator located on the hotel's lower floor. Investigators continued watching the hotel's security footage for about 7 minutes until they saw Kanika staggering around the hotel's first-floor kitchen, which wasn't being used due to renovations, before making a turn toward the freezer at exactly 3:32 a.m. This was the last time Kanika was seen alive on the video footage captured by the hotel's surveillance cameras. The detectives carried out a thorough search of the kitchen that was under renovation and the surrounding areas, but Kanika remained missing until 12:25 a.m. the following Sunday, when her cold body was found on the floor of the hotel's walk-in freezer by one of the hotel's employees. Detectives who arrived on the scene said there was no visible trauma on Kanika's body, with the exception of a small cut at the base of her foot. She was missing one shoe, which explained the injury, but detectives still couldn't figure out how she had gotten inside the freezer or if someone had placed her there. After analyzing the scene, the investigators waited for about 35 minutes before telling Kanika's family, who were still waiting at the hotel until 1 a.m., that they had found Kanika's body in the hotel's freezer. With the discovery of Kanika's body, the situation had changed from a missing persons case to a homicide investigation. But as they looked into the events leading to Kanika's death, they struggled to find evidence of foul play, as all their clues pointed to her demise being accidental. The detectives believed Kanika might have stumbled into the freezer and found it difficult to leave the same way she came in. The security footage did not capture Kanika entering the freezer, so their theory was still speculative. However, one of the investigators who examined the freezer said the door usually closed and latched itself shut if it was left open, and it required the handle to be pushed in order to open it again. Everything seemed to be working fine, but there were still some questions, like why the freezer was on when the hotel wasn't using it, and why the lights were off when Kanika stumbled inside. The hotel staff claimed they were leasing the freezer to a restaurant in the building, and further investigation showed that the last time the hotel's surveillance cameras had caught someone going to the freezer before Kanika was found was several days earlier, on the 30th of August, 2017. As the investigation carried on, the detectives who worked on the case were divided. While most of them strongly believed Kanika's death was accidental, a few others felt there was more to the case and that the investigation was incomplete. However, after an autopsy was carried out by the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office on the 6th of October 2017, the examiner confirmed Kanika Jenkins' death was accidental, revealing that she died from hypothermia. Her toxicology results revealed both alcohol and topiramate, a drug used to treat epilepsy or migraines, in her system. Teresa said these drugs weren't prescribed to her daughter, but detectives believed she might have ingested them during the party. The medical examiner also revealed that the dangerous mixture of the drug with alcohol can accelerate the onset of hypothermia, which meant the concoction was also partly responsible for Kanika's death. With the autopsy revealing a definite answer, the investigation came to an end, and the authorities stated that there was no evidence of foul play. However, despite the case being closed, numerous theories spread online like wildfire, with some people saying that Kanika's friends were involved in her death, as it was later revealed that the credit card used for the hotel room was connected to a Chicago area gang. Several other wild theories claimed the hotel had something to do with Kanika's death, as they believed someone working at the hotel had either lured Kanika into the freezer and locked her in, or they might have killed her off camera before dumping her body into the freezer to make things appear as if she'd accidentally stumbled in. These theories were further strengthened due to the hotel being linked to organ trafficking, and a majority of the public believed Kanika had fallen victim to one of these operations. They claimed this was why her body was kept in the freezer, so the traffickers could preserve her organs and harvest them later. There was also a disturbing anonymous call made to the authorities stating that an acquaintance of Kanika's was part of the notorious Blood Gang and that he had been paid $200 as payment to kill her that night. Even though all of these theories were debunked as there was no feasible evidence behind them, the wild rumors continued to run rampant and ended up overshadowing the unfortunate death of Kanika Jenkins. Kanika's grieving mother, Teresa Martin, in addition to many others, continued to criticize both the authorities and the hotel for negligence. A majority of their criticisms were aimed at the hotel, as the staff failed to shut down the underage party. They also didn't allow Teresa access to the security footage, which may have saved Kanika's life, or properly secure the walk-in freezer. So in 2018, Kanika's family filed a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit against the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare Hotel's parent company. During the trial, Teresa broke down saying, "My life will never be the same. It hurts. It's a pain that I can't even explain. I don't even understand. If they had taken me seriously and checked right away, they could have found my daughter much sooner, and she might have been alive." In October 2023, nearly 6 years after Kanika's death, a confidential settlement was reached, with the court finding the hotel negligent in numerous areas. Even after the settlement, many people still believe there's more to Kanika's death. There are still rumors claiming there was evidence of foul play. But regardless of what you believe, in the end, the tragic case of Kanika Jenkins shows how extreme true crime fascination can sometimes disregard fact and empathy, turning a personal tragedy into a public conspiracy. This, in turn, overshadows the loss of the victim's family and makes the truth harder to find, as it is now buried beneath all the chaos that surrounds it. On February 19th, 2013, the staff of the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles stumbled upon a very disturbing and morbid sight that shocked everyone who saw it. That morning, a staff member had found the body of a 21-year-old Canadian college student, Elisa Lam, who had been missing for weeks. Her death remains one of the strangest mysteries in modern history, as the homicide case has continued to puzzle even the most seasoned detectives to this very day. Over the years, the horrific incident has spawned different theories and speculations arising from all parts of the world, but no one has been able to come to a feasible conclusion on what actually happened to Elisa Lam on the 19th of February 2013. The story of Elisa Lam is not just about the death of a 21-year-old Canadian college student in an infamous hotel, but about the puzzling circumstances that surround it, the confusing evidence left behind, and the chilling past of the victim. Elisa Lam was born on the 30th of April, 1991, in Vancouver, British Columbia. She was a young, bright student who, after finishing high school, attended the University of British Columbia. Records show that Elisa kept a Tumblr blog during her college years called Nouvelle Nouveau, meaning news new. She usually shared her thoughts on everything ranging from fashion to philosophical quotes, and over time, the blog gradually earned a sizable following. Elisa also subtly shared some details about her mental illness on the blog, as she'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. Several witness statements taken from her close friends revealed that Elisa always wanted to travel, as she'd been planning on taking a dream trip. It wasn't long before she eventually decided on having an adventure along California's coast. This is where the story takes a dark turn. On January 26, 2013, Elisa booked her stay at the budget-friendly Cecil Hotel. But after a few days of being lodged in the hotel, she was reported missing. Her mysterious disappearance seemed to happen out of nowhere, and it truly felt as though she had vanished into thin air. An investigation was immediately carried out by the authorities, and it led detectives to the discovery of unsettling security footage that showed Elisa's strange behavior on the day before she went missing. The discovery of the strange security footage raised even more questions, as detectives began to wonder if there was any foul play that led to her disappearance. They started their investigation by looking into the Cecil Hotel itself. Records show that the Cecil Hotel had a disturbing history of bad luck and unfortunate incidents ever since it first opened its doors. The hotel was known to have housed some of the world's deadliest criminals, as it was once an active hub for unspeakable crimes and supposed supernatural occurrences. Many believe that the grim and disturbing history of the Cecil Hotel contributed in some way to the disappearance of Elisa Lam, and this theory became much more popular when the security footage was released to the public. The eerie footage showed Elisa repeatedly stepping in and out of the elevator, looking over her shoulder, and frantically pushing the buttons as though she was being pursued or fleeing from an unknown person. During the investigation, her parents discredited the possibilities of her being pursued as she didn't have any known enemies. Instead, they attributed her strange behavior to her bipolar disorder and depression diagnosis, which later became public knowledge. Records show that everything with Elisa was seemingly fine at the time of her trip. Reports also show that she had a very healthy relationship with her parents, as she always kept constant communication with them, calling almost every single day. However, a couple of her followers on Tumblr pointed out to investigators that some of the posts and quotes she put up in the weeks before her death were increasingly dark and depressive. It was later uncovered during the investigation that Elisa had initially been assigned roommates at the hotel over the course of her stay. However, her roommates began to report her reoccurring unusual and strange behavior, which involved locking them out, refusing to speak, and even leaving notes on paper telling them to leave her alone. Due to her erratic and bizarre behavior, the hotel staff reassigned Elisa to a private room where she was believed to have settled back into normalcy. Before Elisa was declared missing, she was last spotted by a local named Katie Orphan, who described Elisa as a jolly and bright person. After she was last seen, things went radio silent. Due to the sudden halt in Elisa's frequent communication with her family, her parents filed a missing persons report. Several days passed, but there was no news on her whereabouts, and it was around this time that the other residents of the hotel began to notice some strange things. Even though the Cecil Hotel was notorious throughout California as a shady place where lives were lost and criminals were housed, it still offered some decent facilities and services. However, after Elisa's disappearance, the residents began to complain about the foul taste of the hotel's water and its odd discoloration. These sudden complaints prompted the maintenance staff to check the rooftop water tanks. That fateful morning, Santino Lopez, one of the hotel's maintenance workers, climbed up to inspect the rooftop tanks. After opening the lid of one particular tank, he was horrified to find the rotting corpse of 21-year-old Elisa Lam, who had been missing for nearly 3 weeks. The discovery shook the entire state of California and made headlines across the world. After an intense and thorough inspection of Elisa's body, the coroner ruled out homicide as a cause of death because there were no signs of struggle or fingerprints on her corpse that would have given investigators a feasible lead. Detectives knew the circumstances surrounding her death were puzzling, and over the course of the investigation, several questions arose as they asked themselves, how did she access the rooftop without a key? And who closed the lid of the tank if she was already dead? Further investigation revealed that there was another entrance to the roof in case of fire outbreaks. If she had accessed the rooftop using the normal route, an alarm would have gone off. It was also clarified later by the hotel staff member who discovered Elisa's body that the lid was not actually locked from the outside, despite the investigators' initial beliefs. Elisa's room was then thoroughly inspected and found to be clear of any suspicious substances or activity. It was also later uncovered that Elisa had stopped taking her prescribed bipolar medications, which could have triggered a manic episode. The discovery of the elevator security footage led to even more confusion among detectives. Some believed that she was being chased by a dangerous individual, given how frantically she can be seen pressing the buttons and timidly peering out the elevator. But it was never made clear who the individual was or if they even existed. At this point in the investigation, the footage of Elisa Lam in the hotel's elevator was leaked to the public, and the case grew even more complicated. The public came up with several theories, as some said Elisa had encountered an otherworldly being in the hotel that had tormented her, while others believed she was experiencing the effects of not taking her bipolar medications. Despite all the theories floating around, at the end of the investigation, Elisa's death was officially ruled an accidental drowning, with her bipolar disorder cited as a contributing factor. Furthermore, investigators revealed that no signs of trauma, sexual assault, or suicide were found. Even though the investigation was over, there were still some disturbing questions left unanswered. Detectives uncovered an eerie revelation that several new updates were made on Elisa's Tumblr page long after she was confirmed dead. And more disturbingly, her phone was never found. Several investigators believed these were simply scheduled posts Elisa had set up before her death. But the public wasn't convinced, and many believed she was posting from beyond the grave. Since her phone was never found, it was never truly confirmed whether the Tumblr posts were scheduled or if someone else had access to the account. This uncertainty led to countless theories, as many claimed the timing and content of the post were far too eerie to be dismissed as coincidence. Even after the case had been closed, the theories surrounding Elisa Lam's death only continued to grow, as people across the world dug deeper and made their own connections. One of the strangest theories came from a comparison between Elisa's death and the Japanese horror story Floating Water by Koji Suzuki, which was adapted into the 2002 Japanese film Dark Water and later remade in America in 2005. The disturbing parallels to the case, such as a young woman, water tanks, and eerie elevator imagery, made some wonder if Elisa's death had been staged to mirror the film, though no evidence has ever supported this idea. Due to all the strange circumstances that surrounded her death, the Elisa Lam case has remained partially unsolved in the eyes of the public, even though investigators ruled it an accidental drowning. It's been over 12 years since it happened, but this mysterious case still serves as a bone-chilling reminder that some true crime cases may never be completely solved. Even though investigators closed the file, many still believe the real truth behind Elisa Lam's death is out there, waiting to be uncovered. If you have a child, understand this clearly. The person who wants to hurt them will not look like a monster at first. It will begin with a smile, with polite words, and with a man who seems calm enough to trust. My name is Ellie, and this happened 8 years ago when my daughter Abril was 6 and still small enough to hold my hand in crowded places. When the traveling amusement park arrived in town, I took her there on a Saturday night because she had been talking about it for weeks. That was when he stepped beside me and started talking to me as if we had known each other before. He said my daughter looked fearless and confident. He did not try to impress me with exaggerated stories. He asked simple questions about Abril's age and school, and he listened carefully to my answers. Nothing about him felt aggressive. I saw him again 3 days later near a bakery close to my apartment, and he greeted me by name. I do not remember telling him my name at the fair, but he said it confidently. He asked about Abril and mentioned details about the ride she had chosen, which meant he had been watching her closely. At first, we began crossing paths too often for it to be coincidence. He appeared near the bus stop when I took Abril to school, and he stood outside of my job, always with an explanation that sounded reasonable. Then the questions about Abril became more specific, and that was when my discomfort began to grow. He asked whether Abril slept with toys, whether she was afraid of strangers, and whether she trusted easily. He said these things with a smile, but there was a focus in his eyes that made me feel exposed. I told him clearly that I was not interested in friendship and that I did not want him approaching us anymore. He nodded and said he understood, and his voice stayed calm, but his expression hardened for a second before returning to that polite mask. For a few days after that, he disappeared, and I allowed myself to think that he had accepted my rejection and moved on. 5 nights later, someone knocked on my door at 10 in the evening. When I checked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. When I opened the door carefully, a cardboard box was placed directly in front of it. I hesitated before bringing it inside, because a tight feeling had started to build in my chest. But Abril walked into the living room while I was cutting the tape, and I did not have time to stop her from seeing what was inside. The box contained a life-sized doll with a face that looked too realistic to be comforting. Its skin was stretched tightly over sharp features. When I lifted it, I realized it was heavier than it should have been, and the weight did not feel like stuffing or plastic. Abril stepped closer and touched its arm, and she smiled. She hugged it immediately and asked if it was for her, and I did not know how to explain what I was feeling without frightening her. I told her it must have been left by mistake from the fair, even though I understood that he was the only person who would send something like that. She insisted on keeping it and carried it to her room as if it were a treasure. 3 days after the doll arrived, I entered Abril's room to wake her, and I picked up the doll to move it, and my fingers pressed into the arm in a way that made me recoil. The surface was firm but slightly flexible, and the material looked dry and tight. The smell had grown stronger, and it was no longer faint enough to ignore. I carried the doll into the kitchen and placed it on the table under the bright light. I took a knife and pressed the tip gently against a seam near the shoulder. The blade met resistance and then slid into something dense, not stuffing but layered material that did not belong inside a toy. I pulled the knife away quickly and felt a wave of dread that made my breathing uneven. Abril walked into the kitchen at that moment and saw me holding the knife near the doll. Her face shifted from confusion to fear, and she ran forward to grab it, telling me not to hurt her in a voice that cracked with emotion. That night after she fell asleep, I took the doll from her arms and wrapped it in heavy garbage bags. I walked several blocks to a public dumpster and forced myself to throw it inside, because I knew it did not belong anywhere near my child. 4 days later, a padded envelope was left at my door while Abril was at school, and I stood still for a long moment before picking it up. The handwriting on the label matched the writing on the box. Inside, there was a letter that contained one sentence, stating that I should not have thrown her away. My throat tightened as I opened the container over the kitchen sink. A small human hand fell onto the metal surface, gray and stiff, with fingers curled slightly inward. The cut at the wrist was clean, and the nails were dry at the edges. I stared at it in disbelief before my body reacted. I called the police and tried to explain what I was seeing. They examined the hand carefully and confirmed that it was real, and their expressions changed in a way that told me this was far worse than harassment. The next morning, another package arrived, and this time I did not open it alone. Inside was the same doll, cleaned and dressed in different clothes, with rough stitches around the neck. Another note rested against its chest, stating that I now had to take better care of her. A couple of days later, the forensic report confirmed that the doll was the preserved body of a young girl, carefully treated and arranged to resemble a toy. Police patrols increased around my building, and Abril stayed with my sister while the investigation moved forward. I replayed every conversation with him, recognizing how carefully he had studied us. Weeks later, he was arrested in an apartment across town, where investigators found multiple preserved bodies of young girls arranged around a table. They discovered chemicals, tools, and notebooks containing detailed notes about children he had observed in public places. Abril's name appeared more than once in those pages. During the trial, I saw him again and noticed that his expression remained calm while the charges were read. He did not look ashamed or frightened, and he did not try to deny what had been found in his apartment. When the sentence was announced, he turned his head slightly toward me. He said that she would have been perfect, and he said it with a quiet certainty rather than anger. Those words have stayed with me longer than any photograph shown in court, because they revealed how he viewed my daughter as something to possess. Abril is 14 now. She remembers the doll only as something strange that I took away from her. I am telling this because predators do not always look violent at first, and sometimes they build trust patiently while planning something that you cannot imagine. I was close to losing my daughter to a man who spoke softly and smiled often, and that is a truth I will never forget. Anatoly Moskvin was arrested in 2011 after authorities discovered he had exhumed dozens of young girls' bodies from cemeteries over several years. He brought the remains to his apartment, where he preserved and dressed them like large dolls, arranging them carefully inside his home. Moskvin claimed he felt connected to the children and treated them as if they were still alive, a detail that shocked investigators and the public alike. Disclaimer: this video contains content inspired by real-life events and may include archival footage for documentary and educational purposes. Certain elements have been dramatized or fictionalized to enhance the storytelling experience. Viewer discretion is advised. We do not intend to disrespect or exploit any individual, victim, or incident. On the 13th of February 2017, a 13-year-old girl named Liberty German and her 14-year-old friend, Abigail Williams, went for a hike near the Mononhigh Bridge in Delphi, Indiana. What was supposed to be a short hike, lasting less than 2 hours, ended in a morbid tragedy, as unfortunately, that was the last time both Liberty and Abigail were ever seen alive. The girls had planned on meeting Liberty's dad at 3:15 p.m. that afternoon, but they never showed up, and it wasn't long until their bodies were found the following day. The detectives did everything they could to find the person responsible, but all their investigations led to dead ends, and for the next 5 years, the killer remained at large. As the months passed by, the homicide case of Liberty German and Abigail Williams grew cold, and it seemed that their killer would never be brought to justice. However, after 5 long years, the detectives finally found their breakthrough. It all started with a single interview that seemed completely normal at the time, as it was initially overlooked by investigators. This particular interview was later rediscovered, and it finally revealed the identity of the killer behind the gruesome murder of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. This case would later serve as an example of the relentless efforts given by certain law enforcement agents, because even after so many years had passed, the detectives never gave up on the cold case that still horrified and shook the tight-knit community of Delphi, Indiana. Abigail Williams and Liberty German, who were often called Abby and Libby by their loved ones, were 8th graders and close friends. Abby was a saxophone player in the school band and played volleyball. According to her family and close friends, Abigail loved reading, animals, and the outdoors. On the other hand, her best friend Liberty was more athletic, as she was an active participant in the volleyball, soccer, and swim teams. Liberty's sister, Kelsey German, later made a statement saying how she and Libby were excited to start swimming together when Libby started high school the following year. Everything seemed perfectly fine at the time for the 2 teenage girls, and with their winter break coming to an end, the best friends decided to go on a hike around the Mononhigh Bridge east of Delphi. During their hike, Libby posted a picture of Abby on her Snapchat story while they were on the old railway bridge, and they seemed to be enjoying themselves. However, when Liberty's father came by at 3:15 p.m. to pick them up, his daughter and her friend were nowhere to be found. Liberty's worried father frantically searched the surrounding areas, but he couldn't find them, as the girls weren't anywhere near the trailhead he had parked at, and he couldn't reach his daughter's phone. It wasn't long before other members of the girls' family joined the search, but their efforts were in vain, as it seemed like both Libby and Abby had vanished from their hiking trail. They searched the entire trail tirelessly, and by 5:30 p.m., Libby and Abby's families finally decided to report them missing to the Delphi Police Department. After the report was filed, the Carroll County Police Department, the Delphi Fire Department, and Libby and Abby's families carried out another extensive search for the 2 girls. The area was scanned thoroughly, with the search lasting well into the night, but they couldn't locate the missing teenagers. The search was stopped right before midnight, as the authorities were operating under the assumption that the girls weren't in any immediate danger, so they decided to let the search party get some rest before trying again with fresh legs. They resumed their search for Libby and Abby the next morning, and by noon, 2 corpses were found half a mile east of the Mononhigh Bridge at Deer Creek. The discovery horrified the residents of Delphi, Indiana, and during the following day, the corpses were confirmed to be Abby and Libby. Liberty and Abigail's bodies were found covered in blood, as their throats had been slit. Libby's corpse was nude, and her cell phone was nearby, while Abby had Libby's clothes on. The killer had also loosely covered their bodies with sticks before fleeing the scene. The autopsy report later revealed that apart from having their necks slit open, there were no signs of sexual or defensive wounds. However, the most interesting evidence at the crime scene was a bullet found between the girls' bodies. It was a .40 caliber round, and it was still intact. The discovery of the two corpses turned the missing persons case into a homicide case, and the Indiana State Police took over the investigation once the bodies were identified. Detectives thoroughly reviewed Libby's phone and discovered a disturbing video taken around 2 p.m. at the Monon High Bridge Trail, where the girls had been hiking. A white man wearing a blue jacket and blue jeans can be seen in the video footage. His hands were in his pockets, and his head was down as he walked towards Libby and Abby. The grainy footage made things a bit difficult for the detectives to identify who Libby had recorded, but the man could be heard saying, "Go down the hill," while he was talking to the two teenagers. Libby's video prompted police to tag the unidentified man as their primary suspect in the case. A blurry photo of the suspect, taken as a screenshot from Libby's video, in addition to an audio recording of his voice, was later released by the Indiana police. The authorities also shared the chilling video with the public, telling the Delphi residents that the man they nicknamed Bridge Guy was a suspect and they wished to speak with him. The police then told the residents that they also wanted to talk to anyone who was around the area that day and might have seen something. The investigators believed that Liberty and Abigail's killer was hidden in plain sight, which made it even harder for them to track him down, as he'd easily blended back into the residents of Delphi, Indiana. The FBI joined the homicide investigation, and they used around 6,000 electronic billboards to broadcast the case and the FBI hotline, urging the whole of Indiana to provide more information. A reward of $41,000 was offered for any information that would lead to an arrest. Former Indianapolis Colts punter Pat McAfee gave a $97,000 donation to the fund, and the amount later increased to $200,000 thanks to donations from the community and local businesses. However, even with the large reward, none of the tips led to any valuable leads. On the 17th of July 2017, a composite police sketch believed to be the Bridge Guy was released thanks to new information provided by eyewitnesses who were hiking in the area on the day Libby and Abby disappeared. The authorities believed releasing the video they recovered from Liberty's phone would help the investigation, as they hoped someone would be able to identify the Bridge Guy. But despite floods of tips and a hefty reward and several possible suspects, the Indiana State Police couldn't find the answers they were desperately searching for, and as more time passed, the brutal homicide case of Liberty German and Abigail Williams went cold. 5 years had passed at this point, and the investigation looked bleak. Libby and Abby's killer, who was believed to be within or outside of Indiana, now seemed out of reach, and all hope seemed lost until September 2022, when a sudden breakthrough shed a light of hope on the homicide case. A volunteer receptionist had flagged an overlooked document that would eventually lead the detectives straight to the killer. The volunteer receptionist, who was working at the Indiana police station, was filing documents under the Delphi murder investigation into an online database when she came across an interesting note written by a man named Richard Allen. Allen said he'd seen 3 girls along the Monon High Bridge Trail between 1:30 and 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017. The receptionist realized that the timing matched the time the girls were first thought to be missing, so she submitted the tip to the detective in charge of the investigation, thinking it was worth looking into. The investigators dug into this lead a bit more, as they discovered Allen was first interviewed in 2017, and he'd admitted that he was on the trail the day the girls vanished. He wasn't considered a suspect from the get-go, which had allowed him to slip through the cracks of the investigation, but the spotlight had now found its way back to him. Allen was called in again for questioning on the 13th of October 2022. He gave the same accounts that he made during his original statements and interview back in 2017. The detectives could tell that there was something Allen was hiding, so they took their investigations further by searching his home, and they found a .40 caliber pistol. Forensic testing confirmed the bullet found between Libby and Abby's bodies had been cycled through Allen's gun, and even though Allen had pleaded not guilty to any involvement in the teens' deaths, the evidence formed a sufficient basis for his arrest. The detectives fully believed that Richard Matthew Allen was the elusive killer who had evaded them for all of these years, and he was finally arrested on the 26th of October 2022. The Indiana police announced the arrest on the 31st of October 2022, charging him with the murders of Abby and Libby. After many years of grief, for the first time, the Delphi community, in addition to Libby and Abby's families, had hope again that justice would finally be served for the brutal murders that shocked their city all those years ago. Further investigations later revealed that Richard Allen, who was 44 at the time of the girls' murder, had been a resident of Delphi most of his adult life. He was a trained and licensed pharmacy technician, and at the time of his arrest, he worked at a local CVS store. He was also married, and he had one daughter. Allen often came in contact with the Delphi community members, and Libby's grandparents even confirmed that he had printed photos for the girl's funeral. These disturbing revelations proved that the detectives had called it from the very beginning, as their prime suspect had been hiding in plain sight all along. The trial for Richard Allen began on the 18th of October 2024. The prosecutors came prepared to present indisputable evidence that linked Allen to the crime. Allen's pistol was examined by former Indiana State Police firearm examiner Melissa Oberg, and she testified that the bullet found at the crime scene matched the cartridge of the pistol. The 43-second video on Libby's phone that depicted the infamous bridge guy had been digitally enhanced for another screening, and it matched Allen's overall description. Furthermore, prosecutors revealed a shocking truth to the jury, telling them that Allen had confessed to killing the girls in recorded phone calls to his wife and his mother while in custody. Allen's attorney tried to counter the prosecutors by claiming the murders were a ritualistic killing by Odionists, and that the sticks placed on the bodies were the pagan religion's symbols. They even named 4 potential suspects from this group, but the judge banned the theory because they were never official suspects. Then they tried to have Allen's phone confessions thrown out, arguing his poor mental health and confinement made them untrustworthy. But it was already clear to everyone at that point that Allen was the sole culprit. Allen's 17-day trial came to a close on the 11th of November 2024, as the jury made the final verdict and found Allen guilty of all charges on trial. Richard Matthew Allen was then sentenced to 130 years in prison on the 20th of December 2024 for the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. During the final sentencing, the families of Abby and Libby confronted Allen with their grief before condemning the unfortunate leaking of the crime scene photos as a cruel act that forced them to relive their nightmare and grief over and over again. Libby's mother, Terry Timmons, expressed her pain, saying she couldn't fathom why Allen, a father himself, would rob her daughter of her life, and Abby's grandparents, Diana and Eric, called the sentencing a day of great sadness as they were now haunted by the memories of their lost granddaughter. No one could imagine the fear the girls felt that day when they were brutally murdered, yet their killer, Richard Allen, went on to live a normal life like nothing ever happened. The mystery behind Allen's motive still remained unclear, as even though a clinical psychologist who examined Allen had diagnosed him with a serious mental illness, the public still believed there was a hidden motive behind Liberty and Abigail's murder. Allen's clinical psychologist later revealed in court that Allen had told her how he initially planned on sexually assaulting both Libby and Abby, but he got frightened when he noticed a van that was close by, so he cut their throats, covered them in sticks, and fled. But a lot of people still feel like Allen was hiding something. In the end, Allen's reasons didn't matter, as even if he'd explained why he brutally murdered both girls, Libby and Abby's families were left with a deep grief that could never be solved with some measly words from their very own killer.
The cold was the worst part of it. Not the fear, not the darkness, not even the sound of his footsteps above me, but the cold that seeped through the concrete floor and into my bones until I couldn't remember what warmth felt like. I'd been counting days by scratching marks into the wooden beam near my mattress, thin lines that represented mornings. I woke up still breathing, still hoping someone would find me. 88 marks. 88 days since the night he broke down our door and took everything from me. It happened so fast I barely understood it was real. One moment I was in my room doing homework, playing music softly through my headphones, and the next I heard my mom's voice calling out in confusion and fear. I pulled off my headphones and heard the front door splintering, heavy boots on our wooden floors, and then sounds I can't describe without my chest tightening. I wanted to run to them, to help, but my body betrayed me, and I just sat there, frozen, staring at my bedroom door, waiting for it to open. When it finally did, he was standing there in dark clothes and a mask, and he looked at me like I was something he'd been searching for his entire life. He told me not to scream, not to fight, that if I stayed quiet, everything would be okay. But I'd already heard the silence downstairs, the kind of silence that meant my parents weren't coming to save me. He dragged me outside and shoved me into the trunk of his car, and the last thing I saw before he slammed it shut was my house, with all the lights still on, looking exactly the way it always had, like nothing terrible had just happened inside. The drive felt endless, my body cramped and aching in the darkness, and when he finally stopped and opened the trunk, I saw we were deep in the woods, surrounded by trees so thick I couldn't see the road anymore. There was a cabin, small and falling apart, and he pulled me inside and locked the door behind us. "This is your home now," he said, "and you'd better get used to it." The cabin had almost nothing in it, just a bare mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and boarded-up windows that let in thin streams of light during the day. He kept me under the bed most of the time, said I had to stay quiet when he had visitors or went to work, that if anyone heard me, he'd have to hurt them, and it would be my fault. I learned his routine quickly, because survival meant paying attention, learning when he'd be gone and when he'd be back, what made him angry and what made him ignore me. He worked during the day sometimes, left me alone for hours with nothing but the sound of wind rattling the boards, and my own thoughts spiraling into darker and darker places. I tried to keep myself together by thinking about my parents, about my friends at school, about the life I'd had before this became my entire world. But as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, those memories started to feel like dreams, like they'd happened to someone else. I forgot what my mom's voice sounded like, forgot the layout of my own house, forgot what it felt like to walk outside without fear. All I knew was the cabin, the cold, the waiting. But I never stopped looking for a way out, never stopped watching him for mistakes, for moments when his guard dropped just enough. The escape came on a day that felt like any other. He'd been careless, left the door unlocked when he was distracted with something outside, and I didn't hesitate. I slipped out from under the bed, moved as quietly as I could across the floor, and when I reached the door, I ran. I ran through the woods in socks and thin clothes, branches tearing at my skin and my lungs burning from the cold air. But I didn't stop. I didn't know where I was going. I just followed the sound of what I hoped was a road. And when I finally stumbled onto the pavement, I saw a house with lights on and a woman outside walking her dog. I ran toward her, my voice barely working, begging her to help me, to call the police. She looked terrified at first, probably thinking I was crazy or drunk. But then she saw my face, and something in her expression changed. She brought me inside, wrapped me in blankets, and called 911 while I sat shaking on her couch, unable to believe I was finally free. The police came fast, asked me where I'd been held, and I told them everything I could remember about the cabin and the route I'd taken. They found him that same day, arrested him without a fight, and when they searched the cabin, they found all the evidence they needed. My clothes, my belongings, proof that I'd been there for months. The news called it a miracle, said I was lucky to be alive. But luck isn't the word I'd use. Luck is winning the lottery or finding money on the street, not surviving 88 days in hell and managing to run fast enough when the door finally opened. I'm safe now, living with relatives far from Wisconsin, going to therapy twice a week and trying to remember how to be a normal teenager. But some nights, I still wake up cold, still feel like I'm back at that cabin, waiting for his footsteps, and still count the days in my head even though I don't need to anymore. Because freedom isn't just about escaping. It's about learning to believe you deserve it. And I'm still working on that part. His name was Nathaniel Thompson. He was my grandfather, and he was also the greatest man I'd ever met. My grandfather lived a very eventful life, and due to the type of life he lived, he was a man of great stories. I can still remember all the times he looked after me during my childhood, and he would often tell me the tales of his time as a soldier. Nathaniel Thompson was originally an air mechanic for the British Royal Air Force, RAF, during his youth in 1919. He then climbed the ranks in the following years to become a decorated RAF wing commander who fought in 2 world wars. I truly idolized my grandfather, and it wasn't because he was a decorated soldier who served his country and put his life on the line to defend it whenever he was called. While all that was part of it, the real reason I admired him so much was because he managed to fight in 2 world wars and still come back to support and take care of his family. Over the time that I'd spent with him, I'd come to know every single one of my grandfather's stories by heart, as one of my favorite pastimes was listening to him tell me about his life. However, out of all the many stories that he told, there was one particular one that stood out. People used to always say that my grandfather was crazy whenever he told this particular story. But I believed him. And even though people around him had labeled him insane every time he told them what happened on January the 16th, 1919, I knew every word that he said was true. My grandfather always started this story by saying, "I've met and fought along so many comrades during my time as a soldier. But out of all these comrades, there's only one that I still see in my dreams when I go to bed at night, and his name was Frederick George Jackson." I often ask myself why I still remember Freddie so often after all these years. He wasn't really an exceptional comrade, a soldier like the ones I'd met later down the line. However, I remember that the only reason why I can still remember Freddie's face so clearly is because we both remained comrades in life and death. They always say I'm crazy when I tell them that Freddie remained my comrade both during his life and after his death, but it's the truth. I met Freddie when we were both air mechanics for the British Royal Air Force at the RAF Cranwell training facility. The year was 1918, and I bumped into him on the tarmac at the Cranwell training facility located in Lincolnshire, England. We were both part of Goddard's World War I RAF squadron, led by the then Flight Lieutenant Sir Robert Victor Goddard. After our initial meeting, we spent a lot of time together carrying out maintenance on several combat aircraft and airplanes across RAF Cranwell. Freddie was a cheeky and outgoing guy who always seemed to have a smile on his face, no matter how dire the situation was. We would often talk while we carried out our maintenance, and as I got to know him, I realized that Freddie was a man who truly loved living. He would always tell me that he'd been waiting for the war to be officially over so that he could go back to his wife and live a beautiful life with her, just as many couples did before the war. But unfortunately, tragedy struck, as Freddie never got to go back to his wife and live out their story, because he died on the 13th of that month. His death was a very gruesome one, as, despite being an air mechanic who was usually far from the fields of battle, there were still several dangers to our job, and unforeseen accidents were one of them. That fateful day, Freddie had accidentally walked into a spinning propeller, and before he could get out of the way, it was already too late, as the blades had made contact with his skin. The blades of the airplane tore him apart in an instant, and his blood and guts were everywhere on the tarmac in seconds. It was one of the most horrific things I'd ever seen as an air mechanic, and I threw up everything that I'd eaten that day. Freddie's death caused great sadness in me. I knew he was a man who wanted to live a nice life with his wife ever since the signing of the armistice on November 11th, 1918, when the accursed war finally came to an end. I can still recall going over to see his corpse after I had regained my composure. No one believed me, but I could have sworn that despite Freddie's horrible death, his face wasn't twisted in agony like many other soldiers who died during the war. Somehow, even in death, Freddie had a smile on his face. He was buried on the 16th of January, 1919, about 3 days after his death. It was a somber day for the soldiers who knew him at RAF Cranwell. After the funeral, the entire Goddard squadron was summoned by Sir Robert Victor Goddard, as he wanted to take a picture of all of us together. Taking pictures and group photos of the entire squadron during this time was fairly common, as it was often used to document squadron activities, and it also served as a way to honor comrades, both the ones who were alive and the ones who had fallen. In addition to that, taking these group photos also provided a way for us soldiers to preserve our memories forever. After we'd all gotten in place for the photo, I remember suddenly feeling a chill go up my spine. The sensation was so odd, as I'd never felt so cold before, and it seemed like I was suddenly freezing on the inside. A distinct metallic smell then filled the air around me, and it smelled like someone had just spilled an overwhelming amount of fresh blood. I didn't understand what was going on or why these strange things were happening. But before I could do anything, out of nowhere I heard a familiar voice say, "You seen my service cap, Thompson?" "I can't find it anywhere." The voice came from behind me, and even without turning around, I knew exactly who it belonged to. Goosebumps instantly appeared on every inch of my body as I told myself that it wasn't possible. I knew it couldn't have been him because he was dead. But before I could turn around to see who it was, Sir Victor Goddard had taken the photo. I stood frozen in place after the image had been taken, as I was too scared to turn around. It took me a few minutes to get the courage, but when I finally looked back, I swear to you, for that split second, I saw the standing, bloodied corpse of my friend and comrade, Freddie Jackson. Several parts of his torso were missing, and there was blood all over his clothes. But even then, just like he often did in life, Freddie was still smiling. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me because in 1 second Freddie was standing right behind me, and in another he was gone. I slowly walked away after standing speechless in that spot for several minutes. I didn't tell anyone about it at first, because I knew even if I did, they wouldn't believe me. However, over time I felt Freddie would have wanted me to tell people that he was there, even if they called me crazy or insane. That's why I've always told this bizarre story of the air mechanic, Freddie Jackson, as even if it's hard for people to believe my words, I know that Freddie came to me that day we took the photo, because he truly was my comrade, both in life and in death. Whenever my grandfather finished telling the eerie story of the air mechanic Freddie Jackson, I noticed that he always had a worried and petrified look on his face, like he could still remember the sight of Freddie's bloodied corpse. Even as a child, I could tell that while my grandfather loved Freddie, he was also terrified of him. My mother, just like everyone else who'd heard my grandfather's story, always told me to pay his words no mind. Even though she loved him very much, she said there were no such things as ghosts, and my grandfather was just seeing things that weren't really there. Most of my siblings and friends who heard the story said the same thing, as they told me my grandfather was just making it all up to scare us. However, I always defended my grandfather's words to everyone who called him crazy, as I could tell from the look in his eyes that he wasn't lying. As years passed, I grew closer to my grandfather than anyone else in my family. I often visited him whenever I could, and rather than hanging out with my friends in my youth, I preferred to keep him company so he would never feel alone. During my grandfather's older years, he began to forget most of his stories, but no matter how much time passed, he could still remember the story of Freddie Jackson. He'd forgotten some details that he'd mentioned in the past, but he would always tell me that he still remembered Freddie. As the years passed, I could tell my grandfather had now reached the age where his health and his mind both began to deplete. He couldn't talk much or tell his stories anymore, and when he tried to, they were all just ramblings. I can still recall one particular day when I was taking care of him, and he suddenly held my hand so tight and looked me in the eyes as he screamed the words, "He's here again. He's watching me. Your mother thinks I'm crazy, but you believe me, don't you, Tommy? You can see Freddie standing behind me, can't you?" I could see the terror in his eyes as I tried to calm him down, but things only got worse from there. In the following week, my mother found my grandfather screaming at the dining table at some unseen figure, and he told my mother, "Teresa, his blood and insides are all over the plates and the blades are still cutting through him. I can't eat like this. It's unsanitary." At this point, due to the severe hallucinations, my mother had no choice but to take him to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with both Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. This was a very hard period in my life, as I had to watch these diseases eat away at the mind of the man I loved so much. I took some time off of school and stayed with him to the very end. I told him the stories that he couldn't remember and held his hands when he was scared. The last thing I remember him saying was when he uttered the words, "I'm lying down on my back too often. I have planes to maintain, and I have to fix them. It's my duty to my country." Nathaniel Thompson died peacefully in his sleep on the 12th of October, 1972. He was 80 years of age and went with a smile on his face. His funeral was held the following week, and after it was over, I was asked to clear out his room and put his things away for storage. As I sorted through my grandfather's belongings, I came across an odd picture. It was from his time as an RAF air mechanic, and it took me a few minutes. But I soon realized that this was the picture he talked about in the Freddie Jackson story. I found my grandfather standing in the back row, and he was the fourth soldier from the left. Tears filled my eyes as I stared at the picture, but as I studied it closer, all my grief suddenly turned into curiosity as I noticed something behind my grandfather. I took the picture to the window where I could see it more clearly, and I could now make out the face of a man behind him. The man wasn't wearing his service cap like his fellow soldiers, and his face seemed a bit off, like he wasn't really there. I could feel my heart racing as I called my mother and asked her if I wasn't hallucinating and if she could see the ghost-like man behind my grandfather. And she said she could. The strange picture was then shared with the entire family, and everyone could see the man that we all believed was Freddie Jackson. I'd always known my grandfather was telling the truth, and the proof was always there. We all spent the entire evening sharing stories about him after I uncovered the strange picture, and in that moment, I knew just how happy he would be to have seen that everyone now believed him as we shared his stories. I teared up a little, and I hoped that there were airplanes wherever my grandfather was, so he could fix and maintain as many as he wanted with his friend and comrade, Freddie Jackson. In the year 1975, about 3 years after the death of Nathaniel Thompson, Sir Robert Victor Goddard, the former flight lieutenant and leader of Goddard's squadron, published a mysterious photo that depicted his squadron in early 1919. Sir Victor Goddard, who was a retired RAF officer and a decorated air marshal at the time, spoke about the strange photo that he had taken. In Goddard's own words, "I have a photograph in front of me, taken at Cranwell, basically by Bassano's at the time of armistice after the First World War. When the group photograph was put up on the notice board so that those who wanted copies could write their names below, those who scanned the photograph identifying friends then saw, or they were prompted then to see, the face of Freddie Jackson, air mechanic in the topmost row. Capless and smiling, his face being partly hidden by another, his expression seemed to say, 'My goodness me, I nearly failed to make it. They didn't wait or leave a place for me. The blighters.' Well, there he was, and no mistake, although a little fainter than the rest. Indeed, he looked as though he was not altogether there, not really with the group, for he alone was capless, smiling. All the rest were serious and set and wearing service caps. Most had not long returned from church parade and marching in a military funeral. For Freddie Jackson had, upon that very spot, the squadron tarmac, 3 days before, walked heedlessly into the whirling propeller of an airplane. He had been killed stone dead instantly. He evidently was still quite unaware of it. Unfortunately, it's not a very rare event. There have been several such instances brought to my attention. What is somewhat unusual, to say the least, is the official photograph and some 200 witnesses who knew, also the certainty that there had been no hanky-panky in the darkroom. The strange photo of Goddard's squadron took the world by storm after it had been picked up by several papers in 1996. Several other soldiers who had copies also came forward confirming the story and the authenticity of the image. Bobby Capel, a woman who was part of the Women's Royal Naval Service stationed at RAF Cranwell during World War I and was there at the time the photo was taken, confirmed everything in an interview with the Fortean Times, saying, "There's no doubt that the face peeping out from the back row is Jackson." Miss Capel also told the interviewer that she knew Freddie Jackson before his death. The Goddard Squadron photo has remained one of the most mysterious photos ever taken. Several attempts have been made to debunk it, but they've all been proven pointless as the image was an official RAF photo, which made any tampering seem unlikely. Even Goddard himself said the negative was scrutinized for faking at the time and was found to be untouched. To this very day, the mysterious image serves as a timeless memory that tells the real story of an air mechanic named Freddie George Jackson, who came back from death just to take a photo with his fellow comrades in the Goddard Squadron.
My name is Janki Devi. I live in a small town in Gujarat with my younger son, Madhav. For years, life was a struggle after my husband died. I stitched clothes for people in our neighborhood, took odd jobs, and somehow managed to feed my boys. Raj, my elder son, always told me, "Ma, one day I'll earn enough so you don't have to work anymore." He was only 20 when that day seemed to finally come true. It started when our distant relative, Hari Patel, told us about a job opportunity in America. His brother Karan owned a motel in Texas and was looking for someone trustworthy to manage it at night. Hari said Raj would be perfect, hardworking, polite, and honest. "He'll earn in dollars, Janki Ben," he said, smiling. "You can finally have some peace." But peace doesn't come that easily to a mother's heart. When Raj told me about the offer, my first instinct was fear. America felt impossibly far. I asked him, "Beta, why do you want to go so far away? We will manage somehow." But he only smiled and said, "Ma, this is my chance. I'll send money home every month. Madhav can study properly then, and you can rest." Even Madhav was excited. He asked, "Raj Bhai, will you bring me Nike shoes from there?" Raj laughed and replied, "First, let me reach, little brother. Then I'll send you a whole box." When his visa came, the house was filled with both joy and anxiety. Everyone said how lucky I was, how my son would soon be sending money from America. I tried to smile, but I couldn't shake off the uneasiness in my chest. The night before he left, I packed his bag myself. I remember folding his sweater and saying, "Don't forget this, Raj. You catch a cold so easily." He nodded and said, "I'll be fine, Ma. Car and Uncle will pick me up from the airport. I'll call you every day, promise." That was the last night I saw his face in person. Raj reached Texas safely. Karan was kind and helped him settle into the motel. Every day Raj called us. Sometimes it was early morning here, sometimes past midnight. He'd say, "Ma, everything's good, don't worry." And every month he sent money, more than I had ever held in my life. We were finally able to install an air conditioner in our small house, and Madhav got better books for school. For the first time in years, I felt like things were improving. But what Raj never told us was what life was truly like there. He worked as the night manager at a highway-side motel, a place where most of the guests were truck drivers, drunks, or people with shady business. He was often alone at night handling arguments, complaints, and strange customers. His English wasn't fluent and people mocked him for it. Still, he never complained to me. He said, "Ma, work is work. I keep your photo and Madhav's at my desk. It makes me feel close to home." Then one night, my world ended. It was 3 a.m. when the phone rang. I remember because the AC was humming softly and the house was cold. The screen showed a foreign number, Texas. My heart raced as I picked it up. On the other end was Karan Patel. His voice was trembling. "Jonky Ben," he said. "I don't know how to say this, but Raj, he's gone." For a moment, everything around me went silent. I couldn't even breathe. The phone slipped from my hand. Madhav picked it up and spoke to Karan while I just sat frozen. When he hung up, he looked at me with tearful eyes and whispered, "Brother is dead." Later, I learned what had happened. That night, around 2 a.m., a truck driver who was staying at the motel stumbled to the reception, drunk and angry. He wanted ice, but the ice machine had been broken for days. Raj told him gently in his broken English, "No ice, machine broken, gas station 2 miles away." But the man got furious. He slammed a glass bottle on Raj's desk, shattering it. The shards cut Raj's hand and broke the photo frame that held our picture. Raj tried to calm him down, but before he could call anyone for help, the man lunged at him. Raj was just a lanky 20-year-old boy exhausted from long shifts. The driver was a large man, strong and violent. He strangled Raj, and then, as if his rage wasn't satisfied, he used a machete he carried in his truck to behead him. When I heard those words, something inside me broke forever. The police caught the man later, but that didn't matter to me. What justice can bring back a son? My Raj went abroad with dreams of giving us a better life, and he came home in a coffin. When his ashes were brought back, I didn't cry right away. I just sat beside the urn and stared at it for hours. I whispered, "You promised to call every day, Beta. You didn't say goodbye." Madhav stopped studying soon after that. He was only 15, but he started working small jobs to help us survive. How could I tell him to study when the world had already taken so much from him? Karan Uncle sent us some money for a few years after the incident, but life was never the same. We sold the AC, the new books gathered dust, and our house returned to silence. Sometimes at night I sit outside and look up at the stars. I imagine Raj somewhere among them, still smiling, still saying, "Everything's fine, Ma." People tell me, "You should be proud. Your son was brave. He went to America to support you." But I am not proud. I am angry, because Raj was not the only one. There are hundreds of young Indians who go abroad, working in motels, gas stations, and convenience stores, hoping to give their families a better life. Many of them face racism, abuse, and danger every day. Some never make it home. If anyone reading this has a son or daughter far away, please call them today. Ask them not just if they are fine, but if they are safe, because I will never get to ask my son that question again. Raj wanted to change our lives, and he did, but not in the way he hoped. His death taught me that sometimes the biggest price we pay for dreams is not in money, but in blood, distance, and silence. and no currency in the world can buy a mother's peace again.
They say hindsight is 20/20. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes you're living inside your own blind spot, and by the time you see clearly, it's already too late. My name was Penn Sheffield. I was 30 years old, an ER nurse, a mother, a woman with 2 degrees and dreams of becoming a doctor, and I genuinely believed I was having the perfect divorce. Let me take you back to December 10th, 18 days before everything ended. I sat in front of my phone camera, smiling, confident, and told thousands of TikTok followers how incredible my husband Brandon was being, how we were splitting everything 50-50, how we'd changed our Facebook statuses to single, but we're still living under the same roof, co-parenting like mature adults. I asked for budgeting advice. I talked about cutting out coffee shop runs and doing my own nails to save money for my new house. The comments flooded in. You guys are so mature. This is how divorce should be done. Relationship goals even in separation. I felt proud, empowered, like I'd figured out the secret that everyone else was too messy to understand. But here's what I didn't tell them. Here's what I didn't even tell myself. I didn't mention how the house had become a tomb of silence, how Brandon would stare at me from across rooms with eyes that looked hollow, empty, like he was watching me through a window instead of standing right there. I told myself it was grief, natural sadness from a marriage ending. I was wrong. You see, when I met Brandon 10 years earlier, I was 20 and he was 30. That age gap felt like security back then. He seemed stable, established, a father already to his daughter Gracie. I stepped into his life willingly, became a stepmother before I'd barely become an adult myself. We had Kylie together. I worked night shifts at the ER, came home to cook meals, helped with homework, planned birthday parties, all while he stayed exactly the same, the fun guy, the life of the party, the man who never grew because he never had to. And for a decade, I mistook his stagnation for stability. But at 30, something in me cracked open. I looked in the mirror one morning after a brutal 12-hour shift and realized I didn't recognize the exhausted woman staring back. I'd earned a bachelor's in biochemistry, a master's in biology. I was saving lives in the emergency room while planning to become a physician. And I was doing it all while emotionally carrying a man who refused to meet me halfway. So I asked for the divorce, and he said yes. Too easily, too quickly, like he'd been expecting it. That should have been my first warning. The second warning came when I changed my Facebook status to single. I did it first. Then watched as Brandon's profile updated separately, manually, deliberately. We'd both chosen to publicly declare the end. But when I glanced up from my phone that night, I caught him staring at his screen with an expression I had never seen before. Pure, concentrated rage, buried under a smile. "All good," he said when he noticed me looking. "Just making it official, right?" "Right. Official. Final. Public." For me, it was freedom. For him, I realize now, it was humiliation. December 28th started normal. Christmas decorations still twinkling. Morning light filtering through the windows. I was planning to pack boxes later. Maybe take the girls shopping. I'd found a house I loved. The paperwork was almost done. My new life was 18 days into construction, and I was so close to the finish line I could taste it. Brandon was somewhere in the house, moving quietly. Too quietly. I remember thinking about that TikTok I'd posted weeks before, the one where I'd asked what to do when God goes silent during your hardest moments. I'd quoted that phrase everyone loves. The teacher is always quiet during the test. But standing in that kitchen, I realized that the silence wasn't divine. It was human, calculated. The silence of a man who'd lost control and was deciding how to take it back. They say the most dangerous time for a woman is when she's leaving. The statistics are clear. The experts warn you. But when you're living it, when you're calling it a perfect divorce on social media and praising your ex-husband's maturity, you can't see the trap closing around you. And when I took that identity away, publicly, digitally, irreversibly, I didn't just hurt his feelings, because I wasn't leaving a marriage. I was leaving a man whose entire identity was built on being my husband, Gracie, and Kylie's father, the guy everyone liked. I signed my own death certificate. By the time our families arrived that afternoon, knocking on locked doors, calling phones that rang and rang inside an empty house, it was already over. Both of us. Gone. The perfect divorce I had bragged about had become a murder-suicide that proved what I'd refused to see. Some men don't let you leave. They would rather destroy everything than watch you become someone without them. I thought I was building a future. I was actually counting down to an ending I never saw coming. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. The most dangerous time is when leaving. You are not alone.
The messages started after she was already dead, and I didn't know it. I had been seeing her for a short time, and everything moved fast, and I didn't mind that, until she started talking about moving in together like it was already decided. I told her no in a calm way, and I didn't leave room for confusion because I knew what I wanted and what I didn't. She didn't argue when I said it, but instead she just looked at me for a few seconds like she was holding something back. Then she grabbed her things and left without raising her voice, and that silence stayed with me longer than any argument would have. I told myself it was over, and I went back to my normal routine without expecting to hear from her again. 2 weeks later, my phone lit up with a message that didn't sound like her, and that's when everything started to go wrong. The first message didn't try to explain anything, and it didn't ask for a response, since it went straight to a threat that felt too specific to ignore. I want to see you on the ground, bleeding. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to match that tone with the person I knew, and it didn't fit, no matter how I looked at it. I called her once, but the call didn't go through, so I sent a short message asking what was going on, but I didn't get an answer. Instead, I got more threats that came faster and with more detail. If I ever see you again, I will use a knife. I stopped replying after that, and I changed my number after a few days because I wanted it to end. The problem was that it didn't end, since the messages started again on the new number in less than 2 days. I had just started seeing a new girl. She showed me her phone one night, and when I read the messages she had received, I felt something shift because they were written the same way, and they mentioned things that me and my ex had done together that no one else should have known. The messages became more detailed over time, and they started to describe parts of my day that were too specific to ignore. They mentioned places I had been and things I had done only hours before. You stopped at the gas station, and you looked behind you twice before getting in the car. I didn't go to the police because I kept thinking things would calm down if I reached her directly, and I didn't want to involve anyone else because she had a small child and I didn't want to make things worse for him. That decision started to feel like a mistake. That night I stayed home and kept things quiet, but the silence didn't help. It made every small sound stand out more than usual, and I found myself focusing on the back of the house without knowing why. My phone was on the table, and I kept looking at it without touching it because I was expecting another message, even though I didn't want to read it. There was a stretch of time where nothing happened, and that made it worse, because it gave me space to think about what could happen next. Then, the handle on the back door moved slowly, and I saw it turn without making a sound. I stood up and moved toward the kitchen because it was the only place where I could grab something useful, and I kept my steps steady, even though my breathing felt tighter than usual. The door opened, and a person dressed in black stepped inside with their face covered, moving forward without hesitation like they already knew the layout. I was sure it was my ex. Then I saw the light behind her, and it wasn't coming from outside. She had started a fire. The heat built quickly, and the smell of smoke spread through the room in a way that made it harder to focus. But I knew I couldn't stand still, because the person in front of me was already moving toward me with clear intention. I stepped back and kept my distance while watching her hands, expecting them to reach for something that could end it quickly. There was a brief pause where neither of us moved, and that pause stretched long enough to make me understand that I was alone in that moment, and that no one was coming to help me. She moved forward suddenly, and I reacted by pushing her back instead of trying to run, since the fire had already started to block the way out. We collided near the table, and something fell to the floor with a sharp sound that made everything feel louder and more chaotic. She grabbed my shirt and tried to pull me down, and I resisted by shifting my weight and pushing against her, even though I could feel my strength dropping faster than I expected. I managed to hit her hard enough to make her step back, and that gave me a second to pull away and create space. There was another moment where everything slowed down, and I could hear the fire spreading behind us while the smoke got thicker and harder to ignore. She reached toward my neck, and I reacted by grabbing her hood and pulling it back with force because I needed to see who I was dealing with. The hood came off, and the face underneath didn't match anything I expected. It wasn't her. It was another woman that I'd never seen before. Seeing her face changed everything, because it broke the only explanation I'd been holding on to, and that confusion made it harder to react in a clear way. She didn't look surprised or nervous, and that made it worse because it meant she had planned for this moment and accepted it. She moved again without saying anything, and this time her actions were more controlled. We hit the wall hard enough to shake the frame, and I felt a sharp pain in my arm when it struck something, but I didn't stop moving because I knew that stopping would give her control. Before the next move, I became aware of the fire reaching the hallway and the smoke filling the room in a way that made every breath shorter and more difficult. She grabbed my arm and twisted it with enough force to make me lose my grip, and I reacted by stepping into her and pushing her off balance instead of trying to pull away. That gave me just enough space to move toward the front of the house, where the air felt slightly clearer. In the middle of that movement, I heard sirens getting closer, and the sound cut through everything else in a way that made both of us react at the same time. She turned and ran toward the back, trying to escape before anyone arrived, while I stayed near the front because I didn't trust my body to hold up if I tried to follow her. At the station, I answered as clearly as I could, even though the situation didn't make sense anymore. They asked me about her, about the messages, and about the timeline, and I explained it all the same way I'd lived it. There was a pause where the officer across from me stopped writing and looked at me in a way that made it clear something wasn't right. And that moment made it harder to stay calm because I knew the answer wouldn't fix anything. He told me she had been found weeks ago, and that she already had been confirmed dead before the messages started, which didn't match anything I had experienced. I tried to correct him at first, but he already knew the timeline, and that made it clear that the problem wasn't a mistake. The woman they arrested had her phone, her accounts, and access to her identity, and she had been using all of it to contact me and track me without raising suspicion. That meant every message I had read and every threat I had tried to handle had been coming from someone else. The messages stopped after her arrest, but she left too many questions about how long she had been watching and how she had learned before acting. I changed my number again and adjusted my routine, but those actions didn't feel like enough after everything that had already happened. What stays with me is the fact that I spent months reacting to someone I thought I knew without realizing that the real person was already gone. After Carrie Farver was murdered in 2012 by Shayna Golyar, Farver's identity was used for years to send thousands of threatening messages to Dave Krupa and others, making it appear as if she was still alive and obsessively harassing them. This deception delayed the investigation and created a false narrative that misled both victims and authorities until digital evidence and forensic analysis eventually exposed the truth. My name is Marcus Chen, and on December 1st, 2023, I picked up my friend Aria Rodriguez because she said she needed someone to talk to. What I did not know was that she had already sent her ex-boyfriend my exact location, and that in 12 minutes he would pull up behind my car and fire 21 shots at us. I am alive by sheer luck, but the truth about what really happened that night, that took months to uncover. Let me take you back to the beginning. Aria and I had been friends for a while. Nothing romantic, just two people who hung out, smoked, talked about life. She had been dating this guy Carter Daniels on and off for most of the year. From what she told me, he was toxic, jealous, the kind of relationship where they would break up and get back together every few weeks. That night, Aria texted me around midnight. She said she was dealing with drama with Carter again and needed to vent. So I picked her up and we drove to a quiet street called Peppermill Trail in Lake County, Florida. We parked, put on some music, rolled up, just normal friend stuff. But here is what I did not know. While we were sitting there talking, Carter had been blowing up my phone all week, sending me messages accusing me and Aria of hooking up, threatening me, saying he was going to drag me. I showed some text to Aria that night and asked her directly, "Does he have your location?" She looked me straight in the eye and said no. She was lying. About 10 minutes later, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights coming up fast behind us. A white sedan. It pulled in aggressively and blocked us from the front. My instinct kicked in immediately. I threw the car into reverse. That is when the shooting started. The driver got out of the white sedan and just opened fire. I could not see his face clearly, but I knew exactly who it was. Carter. I had seen his car before, recognized the way he moved. And in that moment, with bullets hitting my car, I realized this was not random. This was planned. I reversed as fast as I could, swerving, trying to get us out of there. Aria was screaming. Her bag fell on the floor. Everything was chaotic. I heard the gunshots, felt the car taking hits, but somehow we got away. Once we were clear of the neighborhood, Aria told me to drop her off at a nearby subdivision, said her sister would come to get her. She did not want to go to the hospital, did not want to go to the police station, just wanted to be dropped off so she could walk home. I thought that was strange. We had just been shot at 21 times, but I was in shock. I was not thinking clearly. So I dropped her off and immediately called the police. When deputies arrived and examined my car, they found bullet holes everywhere. The driver's side, the passenger side, the trunk. They counted 21 spent 9mm shell casings scattered across the road. This was not a warning shot. This was an execution attempt, and by some miracle, neither of us got hit. I told the officers everything. Showed them the threatening text Carter had been sending me all week. Told them about his accusations, his jealousy, his obsession with Aria. They asked if I knew who the shooter was, and I said yes. Carter Daniels, Aria's ex-boyfriend. But when deputies went to Aria's house that night to get her statement, something felt off. She was nervous, kept changing her story. First she said she did not know what happened. Then she admitted there was a shooting. Then she said she did not see who it was because she did not have her glasses on. The officers were patient with her, told her she was not in trouble, that they just needed to understand what happened. But Aria would not commit. She agreed to write a statement, then changed her mind, said she was too scared, and that should have been my first clue. The next day, detectives asked Aria to meet them at a restaurant in Orlando. They wanted to hear her version of events. She told them the last time she had spoken to Carter was a couple of days before the shooting. She said she had no idea how he found us. But then detectives mentioned they would be pulling her phone records, and suddenly Aria's story changed. She admitted to calling Carter twice that night, once at 12:36 in the morning, and again at 12:54, right around the time of the shooting. She said she called him after I dropped her off to tell him what happened, that in her mind, she did not think it was him at first, but the timeline did not add up, and detectives knew it. That is when they started digging deeper, and what they found changed everything. Flock cameras captured a white Toyota Camry registered to one of Carter's family members near Aria's house less than 1 hour after the shooting. So her claim that she had not seen him in days, that was a lie. But the real evidence came from her phone. Detectives found that Aria was not just texting Carter through regular messages. She was using a third-party app called Pinger, the kind of app people use when they want to keep conversations hidden. And those messages told the real story. Carter had initially planned to confront me as I walked to my car, but it was Aria who changed his mind. She told him to box me in. She instructed him to call her from a blocked number so she could show me the call and make it look like she had no idea what was about to happen. There was also a message where Aria hesitated. She texted Carter and said, "Don't be dumb with guns." His response, "No, he's dying." And then, 12 minutes before the shooting, Aria sent the final piece. A GPS pin through iMessage, my exact location on Peppermint Trail. She lured me there, she set me up, and Carter came to kill me. When I found out, I could not breathe, could not process it. This was someone I trusted, someone I thought was my friend. The whole time she was coordinating an ambush with her psychotic ex-boyfriend. Detectives believed the motive was simple. Aria and Carter thought that if they got rid of me, they could get back together. That I was the obstacle standing in the way of their toxic relationship. So they planned to eliminate me. Aria turned herself in on March 13th, 2024. Carter was arrested the next day. Detectives used a fake story about his car getting hit in a parking lot to lure him outside. Once he stepped out, they took him into custody without incident. Both of them are now charged with attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. If convicted, they face decades in prison, possibly life. Carter's trial is set to begin in January 2026. Aria's case is still pending. And me, I am still here, still processing the fact that I almost died because two people decided their messed up relationship was worth more than my life. People ask me how I feel about Aria now, whether I think she was manipulated by Carter or if she was driving the plan herself. And honestly, the evidence speaks for itself. She sent the location. She changed the plan. She told him to box me in. She called him twice that night and lied about it. And when police showed up at her door, she played the victim. Carter pulled the trigger, but Aria handed him the gun and told him where to aim. I survived 21 gunshots by pure luck. But the betrayal, that is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Because the scariest part was not the bullets. It was realizing that the person sitting next to me in that car, the person I trusted, had been planning my death the entire time. I was curious. Just a normal teenager, curious about the hidden corners of the internet, the forums and chat rooms nobody talked about. I thought I was safe, that nothing could reach me there. I was wrong. One click, one forbidden forum, and suddenly my life was no longer private. Someone knew too much. Someone was watching, and they weren't going to stop. It started like any other night. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I stumbled on a post titled Truth Forums, where real teens talk freely. The comments were wild, people claiming they'd found secrets hidden in the web, a place where you could talk about anything without adults watching. I was 16, lonely and naive, so I joined. The sign-up was easy, just a username, password, and verification image that looked oddly old-fashioned. When I entered, the chat room was dark, black background, white text, usernames like Shadow Watcher or Night Child. At first, it was harmless. Jokes, memes, late-night confessions. It was freeing, but soon I started getting private messages that didn't feel so random. "Hey, are you wearing your blue hoodie again tonight?" I froze. I was. I typed back, "How do you know that?" The reply came seconds later. "Because I can see you." At first, I laughed it off. Maybe it was a lucky guess. But the next night, the messages got worse. "I like your desk lamp. The warm light makes your face look calm. You should stop leaving your window open. It's cold tonight." I looked around my room, the blinds half drawn, the dim lamp flickering. My heart began to pound. I shut my laptop, but the messages continued. From my phone. The same account, the same eerie familiarity. Whoever it was, they weren't guessing. They knew me. I checked the locks twice that night. My parents thought I was being paranoid, but the fear wasn't something I could explain. It was like being hunted, not by a stranger on the street, but by someone who had already broken into my life. The next week was hell. I deleted my account, or at least I thought I did. New messages appeared anyway. The sender changed usernames constantly, like they were always one step ahead. "Your brother's asleep. You should check on him before midnight." "Mom turned off the kitchen light. You're the only one still awake." I felt my breath shorten. My skin prickled every time I looked at my phone. I started covering my webcam, unplugging devices, checking under my bed like a child again. But the messages always came. And the worst part, they were right. Every detail was perfect. It felt like the walls were whispering. At school, I couldn't focus. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced someone was following me. My friends noticed. I pushed them away. I couldn't risk dragging anyone else into this. By the end of the month, I stopped sleeping. Every creak, every vibration of my phone made me jump. I thought about deleting everything, but I needed proof. Proof that I wasn't going insane. One night I heard a notification ping from my laptop. Against every instinct, I opened it. The message said, "You look tired. Don't cry. You're safe with me." It was accompanied by a photo, taken from outside my window. My own silhouette was visible, hunched over my laptop. My hands trembled so badly that I dropped the mouse. That was the night I told my parents. My dad brushed it off as internet trolls, but my mom, her reaction was strange. She didn't look shocked, just quiet, pale. She hugged me tightly and said, "We'll handle it, honey." That night I slept in their room. For the first time, I felt safe. The next morning, my mom said she'd contacted someone at a local tech group who could help trace the messages. She asked for my login info, passwords, and old screenshots. I gave them all to her, relieved that someone was finally taking it seriously. Days went by. She kept saying the investigation was ongoing, but I never saw any updates, no calls from authorities, no trace reports. Something didn't feel right. I did my own digging. I borrowed my dad's laptop, used a new email, and traced the IP of the messages using a free online tracker. My stomach dropped when I saw it. The IP was from inside our home. At first I thought maybe it was a glitch. Maybe a hacker had rerouted signals, but the more I traced, the clearer it became. The messages were being sent from the same Wi-Fi network I used. I stayed quiet, pretending not to know, but the moment I looked at my mom, I saw something different in her eyes, like she already knew I'd figured it out. That night I faked going to bed early. I hid behind the half-closed door and waited. Around 11:30 p.m. I heard footsteps. Light, careful, deliberate. Then I saw her. My mom slipping into my room, sitting at my desk and turning on my laptop. She opened the very chat forum I'd deleted, and under one of the usernames that had haunted me for weeks, she began typing. I couldn't breathe. My own mother was the stalker. I confronted her the next morning. She froze. Her lips trembled, her hands shaking. And then she said something I'll never forget. I just wanted to protect you, honey. Tears filled her eyes. She claimed she'd discovered the forum before I did, that she'd seen how dangerous it was, the kinds of people who lurked there. So she created fake profiles to watch over me, to scare me off from ever going back. But she went too far. The secrecy, the psychological games, she admitted she couldn't stop. It became an obsession. She said she needed to know everything I did to keep me safe. I didn't believe her. Not fully. There was something in the way she spoke, a hint of guilt mixed with something darker. Control, passion, like she had enjoyed the power, the fear, the ability to make me depend on her. We started therapy soon after. My father was devastated. He moved out temporarily. My mom was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and obsessive tendencies that blurred her sense of boundaries. But therapy didn't erase the fear. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart still raced. I'd see her in the hallway sometimes, lingering by my door like she wanted to apologize, but couldn't find the words. Eventually, I moved out. First to my aunt's, then to college. I changed numbers, usernames, and devices. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear that familiar ping. A phantom echo of those messages. I'll open my inbox and stare, half expecting to see, "You're safe with me." Now, years later, I look back with mixed emotions. I understand my mom's fear. The world online is dangerous. But fear twisted her love into something toxic, something that destroyed trust. She wanted to protect me, but she became the very danger she feared. What happened taught me a painful truth. Sometimes the threat isn't outside. It's within the walls you call home. If you're exploring the internet, please protect yourself. Be careful what you share, who you trust, and what you click. The internet remembers everything, and sometimes, so do the people around you. And if someone is watching you, even out of love, remember this: safety should never come at the cost of freedom.